Ruby is in London. Ruby, good evening. What's your question?
Hi there, good evening, Daniel. I work at a nursery and my employer held a private party for her family and friends at my workplace before Christmas. And then I went into work the next day, and that whole week there was an outbreak of about 11 cases in my workplace, staff and children, myself included. Now, firstly, I wasn't paid for those days that I was self-isolating. And I know from your previous caller with the nursery, you said that we would be entitled to SSP. But more importantly, I raised this issue with her about the party that she had in my workplace, how it wouldn't be COVID guidelines.
Well, presumably, Ruby, you're in Tier 3, so it would have been completely unlawful.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And I even asked the police for advice on this as well, and they said as well that it would not have been lawful. She said that she could have it with a licence, but I expressed to her that that would not have been the case with COVID regulations. Anyways, we exchanged emails, and I expressed to her my concerns with this party, and she's gone ahead to call me unprofessional, and then a day later she suspended me on these grounds. So now I want to know, do I have any rights against this? Can I take her on with this?
Wow.
Because she's now suspended me for this.
My goodness. So you've got a criminal employer who's holding completely unlawful parties at work, putting everyone at risk, who then has the temerity to suspend you when you complain about it, having contracted COVID.
Exactly. And she's told me that I cannot definitively say where I contracted COVID. However, I'm of a great belief that I did contract it. They're seeing there's 11 other cases and I don't go anywhere because I'm a carer for my grandmother myself. So I keep very careful.
Right. Well, let's deal with the first point first. I'll come to the suspension in a moment, but let's deal with whether you have a claim for contracting COVID. If an employer is negligent and this has to fall into that category. It's difficult to see how they'd have any defence to that. If the employer is negligent, then you can claim damages for personal injuries if you get ill as a result. Now, it's going to be really, really, really tricky to prove that you caught COVID from touching a surface at work. Because that's not the best way, or not the main way that the disease is spread. As we know, it's spread mainly in air particles, water particles in the air. And it's going to be very difficult to prove that was how you caught it, as opposed to commuting or as opposed to over the Christmas period, one of your colleagues doing something, maybe having lunch with their families, catching it and passing it on to others at work. Because the fact 10 or 11 people at work had it doesn't prove you all caught it from dirty surfaces. It just proves one person had it and passed it on to others. So I think, Ruby, I hate to say this, it's going to be really difficult to get in any sort of claim for personal injury for catching COVID. Just before I come to suspension, are you better now?
I am better now, yes, thank you.
Good. And as far as you know, your grandmother hasn't caught it?
No, I self-isolated obviously from her, and she was negative as well, thankfully. But when I did raise this with my employer, obviously the party, she put it on social media, there was way more than 30, 40 people there. And that's where again, like you explained, I thought, well, my belief is that it was obviously from her having this party. That's why I contracted it. Because when I went into work the next day, the decorations were still up, the cake was still up, everything. And so obviously this is where I have that strong belief that I caught it from there. But as you explained, it's quite difficult to pursue that.
It's difficult to prove. A party for 30 or 40 people. Is your employer a complete idiot?
No. Well, Daniel, she did say that she had a licence from the local council and that she would have been granted, and she said that the police were there, everything. And all of us are kind of raising eyebrows at this, including the police, saying, OK, you could have a party with a licence without COVID, but with COVID, it's very, very, there's no way that would happen.
Yeah, she's lying through her teeth, Ruby.
Exactly.
There's not a shadow of doubt about it. All right, so what can you do about the suspension? First of all, how long have you worked?
It's coming up to 24 months in April, so I'm just under it.
You're just under 2 years. So you know exactly why I'm asking you that, don't you?
Yeah, I do. But however, Daniel, can I not go through the whistleblowing procedure?
That would be quite difficult. I suppose, because I'm just thinking this through, were you suspended after you raised the problem? You would have been, wouldn't you?
Yes, I raised the problem. She claimed that I was an unprofessional, and it was a private life, and then I got suspension on those grounds.
OK, so you've been subjected to a detriment because you blew the whistle. That does give you a claim, and if you're dismissed, it certainly gives you a claim, and you don't need 2 years' employment to bring that sort of claim. It's an exception to the 2-year rule. Let me just run through the requirements for a whistleblowing claim with you. First of all, you've got to say something to your employer that shows that they've potentially breached legal regulations. Well, you tick that box easily. There's no doubt about that. Second of all, you've got to reasonably believe, this is where you just might have a problem, although I think you'll get through this. You've got to reasonably believe at the time that you make the disclosure, at the time you blow the whistle, that what you're saying is in the public interest. Sounds to me like it probably is. I'm assuming this is a kiddie nursery as opposed to a plant nursery.
No, it is kiddie nursery. It's under 5.
Right, so there are children who can be exposed to this virus as well.
Yes, well, there was about 6 children that caught it and then about 5 adults. So the children themselves got involved. And I know, I cannot prove it, but she did not close the nursery after 5. She only closed it after 6 or 7 cases.
Yes. So that sounds to me like you will have a claim for whistleblowing because that is clearly something you can reasonably believe is in the public interest. And in fact, you'd have a really strong claim, Ruby. Thank you. You've actually answered the question for me. You've given me the answer. Now, will you do something? Are you a member of a union?
I am, yes.
Great. Go to the union, get them to put in a claim form for subjecting you to a detriment for whistleblowing. And if you're dismissed, get your claim form in within 7 days, because that entitles you to try to get an order to be rehired and paid your full salary by the employer. Ruby, I'm going to have to stop now, only for reasons of time. Will you call back and tell me what happened?
I will do.
Thank you
Daniel.
so
Thank you very
much.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's it from me, Barrister Daniel Barnett.